So, today we're going to have a look at a video by one of Jeranism's friends, ODD Reality. And as you can see, he's not afraid of using a little CGI as part of his whole propaganda machine. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about a video that he done about a week ago where he took science, real science, out of context so that he could support his little belief system that rockets don't work in space. So let's see what he has to say.
Hey everybody, ODD here. This will be a quicker and cleaner version of the video that I made last night. So let's jump right in. There is an island in Canada called Devon Island, and this place is home to the Houghton Mars Project. It's no secret. In September of 2015, Jeranism made a video about this, and it caught my attention, and it made me think a lot. Though I was interested, I still thought to myself that of course they have to have a simulated Mars environment to train in. Why wouldn't they? It's not that weird, right?
No, it's not weird at all. But what you say next is weird.
But since that time, I've learned a whole lot more about the idea of space travel, vacuums, non-vacuums, and how thrust and combustion are impossible in a vacuum. Therefore, space travel is a hoax. Let me show you what I mean with two scientific experiments that were conducted in a vacuum chamber.
And taken out of context by a flat earther.
I'll link these videos in the description. All credit to Cody's lab. This first video proves that thrust is not possible in a vacuum.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Cody's lab.
So watch real carefully. There are some hints there. There are some little hints that actually prove what ODD is talking about is total deception.
As you can see, we're using the vacuum chamber once again, and I actually have a little feather right there, as you can see, suspended in front of a 12-volt electric fan. See, I got the batteries, a pressure gauge, and everything in there. To turn it on, I have a little tilt switch that says magnetically controlled. You see when I turn the fan on, it blows the feather all over the place. This is, of course, at atmospheric pressure right now. So, I want to take this down to Martian conditions. You might have noticed the Martian reference over there. First thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of dry ice to the chamber, just so that the atmosphere gets replaced with CO2. Many of you guys were complaining about that last time. So now I should have a CO2 atmosphere, or at least it'll create one. And now we're going to suck out all of the air, or at least most of it, down to the point where about between 4 to 6 millimeters of mercury, which is, of course, the pressure on the surface of Mars. So let's plug in the vacuum pump. There we go. Give this a little while to suck down. These pieces of CO2 look really interesting in the vacuum. The gas produced causes them to levitate and float all over the place. But if you can see the gauge over there, you can see that the air pressure is just about to the point where it's would be considered the surface of Mars. So since we're at Martian air pressure, let's unplug the vacuum pump and let's turn on this fan. Now place your bets as to what's going to happen to this feather. Now the fan's only going to produce maybe 10 miles per hour worth of wind. On the surface of Mars, the fastest recorded wind speed is about 70 miles an hour. But let's say the superstorm in the Martian had wind speeds of 200 miles an hour, 20 times what we have here. To compensate for that, I imagine the feather is about 20 times easier to push over than a spaceship. So let's see what happens. Okay, fan's on. And the feather's not moving. Actually, zoom in on
that. So did you see the clue? I will point it out as we get close to it. But what ODD is trying to indicate here is that you require a fluid of some description for a fan blade, a propeller, or a jet turbine to actually create thrust. by pushing air. And that's not how a rocket engine actually works. A rocket engine has its own fuel in its own oxidizer, and that's how they create thrust, by actually producing their own gas. They don't need any gas around them, they can produce their own. Later on in the video, he actually talks about solid fuels and how they have their own oxidizer and that they don't work in a vacuum either. And when we get to that, I will completely blow his whole theory out of the water and send him back to the drawing board. So that little clue is about to come up, and this chamber is essentially becoming a vacuum inside. And look at that. The dry ice is moving around, but it's a vacuum. It can't possibly move around in a vacuum. ODD is going to tell you that. And the fan blade, what's going on there? So what is going on there? Well, dry ice is frozen carbon dioxide. And in that vacuum, as it melts, it turns directly into carbon dioxide gas, which is expelled with a little bit of force, which causes the chunk of dry ice to move around, despite the fact that it's in a vacuum. And this is exactly how rockets work. They expel gas in a particular direction, even though it's a vacuum, and they move in the opposite direction because of the mass of that gas and the force that it's ejected. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So let's see what happens next.
This second experiment proves that combustion is not possible in a vacuum.
So how about something that has its own oxidizer, such as gunpowder? See, this is a mixture of charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. When heated, the potassium nitrate gives off oxygen, which is sulfur, and charcoal uses to burn. So I've got a little bit sitting in there. Let's apply the laser goggles, and let's light it off. First in the atmosphere, and then in the vacuum. Okay, as you can see, it produced lots of smoke and burned rather quickly. Most of the air is now gone. Let's see what happens. The gunpowder did not ignite. I saw some smoke coming off of it, so I know it burned a little. Let's try again more in the center of the pile. And then that's it. The gunpowder does not burn. And so I'm going to be burning some rocket candy. This is a mixture of sugar, potassium nitrate, and iron oxide. This is used in amateur rockets because the ingredients are readily available and the amount of thrust it produces is quite high. So let's light this on fire and see how it does. So this is in Earth atmosphere. As you can see, it burns rather rapidly, producing a little bit of thrust even. As you can see towards the end, it moved it around. So now let's try it inside of a vacuum. No ignition. That's interesting. I did see some little poofs as it tried to burn, but it was unable to sustain itself. So even when it's in one solid piece, they can't chain and continue burning. So I've let a little bit more air back into the chamber. Let's see if it'll burn now. That's a no-go on burn. Wait. It's kind of smoldering. And it's out.
So solid rocket fuels don't burn in a vacuum and therefore don't work in space. Well, that's interesting. It's a shame though that solid rocket fuel boosters are only ever used in the first stage, which is still in the Earth's atmosphere anyway. And from then on they pretty much use liquid fuels like hydrogen and actually combust it with pure oxygen to create thrust. So in actual fact, this experiment, as far as the context of proving that rockets don't work in space, is pretty much null and void and doesn't really prove anything because they don't use solid rocket fuels in space. They use liquid fuels with pure oxygen supplied as the oxidizer and combust it that way. So back to the drawing board again, Mr. ODD. The reason why they don't use solid rocket fuels in space may well be that they don't work in a vacuum, but it's also the fact that you can't control a solid rocket fuel engine once it's ignited, whereas liquid fuel or gaseous fueled rocket engines can be valved and turned on and off at will to control manoeuvres. I'll explain that a little bit later. So let's see what happens next.
Acetone peroxide in the atmosphere in 3, 2, 1. Yes, that's a little bit more volatile than gunpowder is. Acetone peroxide in vacuum in 3, 2, 1. It still didn't burn.
Did you see the clue on rocket propulsion? In case you didn't, I'll bring it to your attention. But this acetate peroxide is interesting stuff. If you have a look at the slow-mo, it actually burns and kind of produces a gas, and then the gas ignites nowhere near the actual acetate peroxide, which means it's using up oxygen in the surrounds to actually combust. So you've seen it a couple of times. There's another slow-mo of it. The flame actually starts way up high and then comes down low. But here's the interesting little thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, the little clue. Watch this. The little bits of acetate peroxide are jumping around as they burn a little bit. There's an explosion and it actually launches them up and away from the pile. So as the laser ignites the little bits of acetate peroxide, a little portion of them actually combusts, and like a rocket, they get launched.
So essentially, what we have here is solid evidence that space travel is fake. Therefore, the Mars rover is a complete hoax.
No, what we really have here is somebody with confirmation bias falsely using evidence to falsely confirm their belief system. Nothing more, nothing less.
And this Mars simulated environment on Devon Island is where they fake Mars rover footage and where they will fake all future Mars footage. I mean, they could fake this anywhere really, Greenland, Nevada, or even other remote islands such as Devon Island. But since the Hot on Mars project is public knowledge, we have a good lead here. Since at least the 1950s, going to Mars has
been a paranoid rant. I can feel it coming on. The paranoia is kicking in.
And what these movies are doing are conditioning us to believe that a trip to Mars is viable, which it isn't. We are merely being programmed to buy into the hoax when the time comes. Stay on your toes and keep a good spotlight on these liars. We need to watch everything they do like a hawk. This has been ODD. Thanks for watching.
So there you have it. If you watch ODD's original video carefully, or even this one because it's the same example of it, you will see evidence that rocket propulsion is possible in a vacuum and therefore possible in space. You just need to ignore what he's saying and basically watch with your eyes, and you'll see little instances, little examples of rocket propulsion or propulsion in a vacuum. And the fact that he shows that solid rocket fuel does not burn in a vacuum really makes no difference at all to the whole argument, because solid rocket fuels are only ever used within the atmosphere anyway, because when you ignite a solid rocket fuel engine, you can't turn it off. And that's what is required once you get out of the Earth's atmosphere. You need to be able to control that rocket engine. You need to be able to turn the fuel source on and off, turn that rocket on and off for control, so you can line up to certain things, reach certain velocities, slow down, brake, all of those kinds of things. And for that, they actually use liquid fuels or gaseous fuels like hydrogen and actually supply the oxygen to them so that they burn. Yes, pure oxygen is the oxidizer. And they can valve that stuff on and off to control the rocket engine, to control their maneuvers and movements in a vacuum. So this pretty much sends ODD back to the drawing board, and I hope it sends a lot of other people back to the drawing board as far as their skepticism of whether rockets can work in space or not. I hope you have a great day. I'll be keeping a closer eye on this guy, because I think that his deceptive behaviour and his deceptive videos need to be kept in check, and that people really need to know the truth about this stuff. Have a great day. Catch you later.